The Kashmir Files was the product of a synergistic partnership between three unique entities. The first, the Kashmiri Pandit community, who, as you said, are the Jedi Knights of Kashmir Valley. The second, director Vivek Agnihotri and producer Pallavi Joshi, who are the corresponding Han Solo and Princess Leia. And third, and most importantly, the Indic Rasa Parampara, starting with Bharat Muni and extending all the way to Abhinav. This Trinity partnership was fostered by Dr. Surinder Kaul, my younger partner. We are all equal volunteers in global Kashmiri Pandit diaspora, a civil society resistance and Renaissance movement. Let me start with the art, the artistic and aesthetic aspect first. And I'm going to hold everybody's hand and take you on a journey, which is a 1,000-year journey that many people in the West have said is Indic civilization's greatest contribution to humanity. Our framework of Rasa. The Kashmir Files is an artistic phenomenon that the ancient Sanskrit writers would describe as a taranga, a monstrous tidal wave. It has swept everything away in front of it. Who would have thought that it would succeed by deploying Bhayanak, the Bivatsa Rasa, terror and disgust? Entertainers, quite rightly, flee from the horror rasa. There are only a few examples of great dramas in India's literary and film tradition which employ this rasa. So what then is the secret here? The ancients of Kashmir tell us that when facing the horribly swollen and formless terror, which makes even fire burn, which strips away everything of oneself, the way the Kashmiri Pandits were stripped in real life and faithfully shown in the movie, then the Sajna, the noble human being, is left with only one thing, and that is his truth. And notwithstanding the house of lies that India has been for the past 75 years, the brave Kashmiri Pandits have not deviated from their truth. For the last 700 years, from the time of the chronicler Jonah Raja, the Kashmiri Pandits have meticulously and continuously documented the horror that entered the valley. This documentation, in terms of its continuity, is unrivaled in the history of the world and is recognized and accepted by respected historians, whether in Europe, America, Japan, or anywhere else. But the Kashmiri Siddhas did not stop with their history. They went deeper into this rasa. And behold, They predicted a miracle would occur with the truth force if one stayed true to oneself, as opposed to succumbing and becoming a victim of the Rakshas with their war cry of Ralev, Galev, Selev. For those who are fearless and experience the horrific, they will eventually taste the pleasure of expansion, which will be accompanied by elements that are purely bright, light, and pleasant. The complementary rasa, vibhatsa, the odious, they said, will ultimately lead to a dilation, a vistara expansion. And the truth of our framework was born out. That which did not kill the Pandits only made them stronger. In Shiva Drishti, the luminous Abhinav Gupta of the 10th century emphatically says that when all is lost, if one focuses on the eternal within, then even in the midst of pain, there is consciousness expansion and one experiences joy and bliss. But Abhinav didn't stop there. He went even further. Imagine the depths of understanding that our adepts had. He says, sometimes the circumstances of the pain are so intense that it creates a feeling of complete hopelessness. A state of nevermore will it be. Yet, behold, it is at the very moment of the cessation of expectation that transmutes the pain energy into virya that Makaran talks about, into the heroic freedom and liberation, the precursor to great joy. And Naga in the 11th century reaffirms our conviction and confidence when he says, what a chamatkar, how amazing. When my heart thinks of the joys we had in the past and continues to hanker after peace, now even as unendurable suffering experience, this heart remains full of the bliss of the goddess. I am so proud, even as Kashmiri Pandits who mourn their losses. We have not deviated from our way of life, our truths, because we know that Kali rules supreme in the Bhayanak Rasa, and Shiva rules Vibhatsa. And even if the treacherous world forsook the Kashmiri Pandits, Shiva and Kali would not forsake us, but lead each one of us to our promised land. It was our parampara which was our savior. It is our parampara which took us to the light at the end of a dark 700-year tunnel. The rebirth of Krishna in the movie at the end mirrors accurately the rebirth of the Kashmiri Pandit community, which in one generation that is unparalleled in the course of human history has gone from nowhere to supreme accomplishment. the Kashmiri Pandit way of life in 30 years has already become victorious over that of its tormentor, which continues to slide Kashmir into darkness. Hail Shah. I've stated elsewhere that an authentic Indic story is the most powerful technology in the world. It can trigger rasa that can move the body, the mind, the heart, and the spirit. To his eternal credit, director Vivek faithfully absorbed the hundreds of stories, each one of which was horror unbound, that were related to him by the family members of the victims. He transmuted them accurately without attempting to varnish their truth even an iota. Truth can always be disputed. After all, India is the land of debates. But when this truth is the truth that is carried by the Pran Shakti of the thousands of tortured and murdered Kashmiri Pandits, communicating the great tragedy with absolute fidelity, then you, the audience, at the level of consciousness, doesn't matter whether you're Indian, American, English, Thai, African, consciousness is universal. And consciousness imputes that the movie is unimpeachable. The Kashmir Files is beyond debating facts now, beyond the skeptical mind. The Karuna Rasa has been triggered, and the story of the genocide of Kashmiri Pandits embedded deep inside the hearts of each viewer who is shaken by what he or she has experienced. Bollywood has made many movies on Kashmir once color came into film. Since the 1960s, Bollywood has gone and made it their stage. But nobody has cared to go beyond the Bollywood formula and focus on the travails of the Kashmiri Pandits. Occasionally there would be a national anger. There was also the so-called Hamlet in Kashmir, which the gullible Indian public swallowed unhesitatingly. So I do want to give a word about Haider. You know who the first Haider in Kashmir was? The first Haider in Kashmir was born of Kota Rani, the last Hindu ruler of Kashmir, and her husband. It was a shotgun marriage, who was a Buddhist who converted to Islam. Haider was about as multicultural as could be and reflected the ethos of Kashmir, which sat astride the Silk Road. You know what they did? They killed Haider because he was not Muslim enough. They killed Kota Rani. That was the beginning of the Shah Mir dynasty, and that began the descent of Kashmir into darkness. But the Haider movie did not reflect the truth about Haider. So many film directors have come to Kashmir, but when it came to Kashmiri Pandit genocide, all directors turned pale. It was Vivek who did horror right. Why him and nobody else? Again, for this, we have to look at a Kashmiri Siddha by the name of Vatuvanath. He wrote a very brief text. It has only 13 sutras, noted for their brevity and explosive power. Vatuvanath tells us that if you want to seek a great mystery, a rahasya, and Kashmiri Pandit genocide astonishingly remained a great mystery in India, then you have to drink from direct experience with it. And Vivek did that. He traveled around the world drinking with direct experience of the stories of the Kashmiri. And Vatuvanath says When you do that, then there will be a sudden moment of explosion where you're lifted from your ordinary perceptions into the totality of consciousness. But what do you need to have to get there? And his answer is most interesting. He says to have that experience, you have to have mahasas. Mahasas is best translated as mad courage. It is not just fearlessness, but mad courage, which Vivek Agnihotri demonstrated, where he was and still is willing to risk life and limb to bring this story to the world, to overcome the fearness that, hey, what happens if the censor board shuts it down? What happens if, people come and burn down cinema halls? You need mad courage. That's the lesson to be learned as to why Vivek succeeded when others. So you have a situation here in this artistic creation where the Kashmiri Pandit, the warriors of truth, joined with a Mahasa storyteller in a manner that followed the Indic Rasa Parampara and Wala the Kashmir Files Taranga. It has gone on a Rasa rampage and smashed the house of lies into smithereens. Oh yeah, the truth will set us free. Horror was done right in Indian storytelling and drama. The last best-selling horror story in India was in 915 AD, more than 1,000 years ago. Truly, Vivek has achieved the pinnacle of success, a resounding validation of the Vibhatsa Rasa Parampara. You, the audience, got the unvarnished Rasa experience, and you too had the Jhatka moment of, oh my God, this could happen to me. Worse, this could happen anywhere in India because all the conditions precedent are here. I promised you that I would talk about the art and war in this movie. So now, very briefly, here is the war part. This movie has exposed what I have called in my other writings the long war. That fat, dumb, and manipulated India has been fighting on its northwestern frontier for the past 5,000 years. Its most recent rupa is, of course, with Pakistan, Taliban, and their proxies. The movie has shaken Indians because of the Pratyabhijna movement that they have experienced that has made it India's movement of reckoning because of the shock recognition of the three great war revelations in the movie. And I will now make them explicit. Number one, first, that it has exposed that in 21st century India, there is still a medieval war going on that India, unfortunately, is losing. A war where there is a section of Indian civil society which has its own codified, legitimized, incentivized tribal framework where seemingly ordinary householders can join violent fighters and turn on their neighbors in seizing power, and most importantly, the spoils of war. Second, it has exposed that the notions of harmony and peace and other nostrums that politicians peddle of the idea of India are all false platforms. They are second order factors only. There is only one idea of India, which our emblem proudly displays. That is the idea of Satyamev Jayate, which is the Vihan bearing the Chaturanga lions resting on the wheel of Dharma. Keep that perpetually in your mind Whenever anyone talks about the idea of India, Satyamev Jayate, Dharma, that's what's going to make us into the Chaturanga lions that will roar in all four directions of the country. Never sugarcoat the truth. Indians have demonstrated in millions around the world that they want uncompromising truth, even if it is of the Bibhatsa and Bhayanak kind. Prashant Joshi said, we will have to drink the bitter medicine. Third and finally, the great revelation, war revelation in the movie that Tunji touched upon, is India's war in Kashmir is between Shariat Kashmir and Sharda Kashmir. Make no mistake about it. That's what it's all about. That's what those guys were singing, Azadi, Azadi, in the Jama Masjid Mosque as recently as yesterday in Kashmir. Shariat Kashmir represents subjugation and despair. Sharda Kashmir represents Swatantra, a state of freedom, a state of knowledge, a state of peace. But we have to accept that human behavior can be driven more by blind faith grooming than by knowledge programming. The greatest terrorists, starting from 9/11, had degrees, but they were prisoners. Their minds had been imprisoned. Sharda Kashmir is the cradle of Indic civilization. India has to win the war in Kashmir decisively. The Kashmiri Pandits have to get punitive justice and their homeland. Failure is not an option, and delaying justice is not an option. These three war revelations have confronted India and made this into a moment of reckoning. How India faces these challenges and emerges whole is key. India which can unlock the full potential of every Indian, irrespective of religion, caste, and creed. But an India whose daughter, Sharda, can live free and fearlessly from Kashmir to Kanyakumari and walk at midnight. I end with a saying of the Mahabharata. When in a horrific terror scene where instead of a woman being made to eat rice cooked in the blood of her husband, as was done in real life and in the movie, in the Mahabharata, a warrior drinks blood. Some of you know who he is. He's one of the Pandavas. But Vyasa, the author, was unsparing. Unsparing. He writes, this one is no human being. He wrote that about Pandava. So remember all this. The genociders of the Kashmiri Pandits were subhuman. Werewolves who continue to masquerade to this day as civil society lambs. In fact, one of them was called Gandhi. So savor the new old aesthetic rasa of the Kashmir files, because the odds are that the stars are not going to align in a repeat movie and that there will be spontaneous ignition like we have had here. We are in a momentous moment. We have to grab it. Today and tomorrow, we will travel together to explore the art and war in the Kashmir file and all the other themes as each speaker guides us on their deep insights on our theme subject of the Kashmir files, India's moment of it. Thank you.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.